Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Transform Your Ear live talk. So, in this session, what we're going to be doing today in this live stream, we're going to be talking about why ear training is so crucial to creating great guitar solos. Because ear training goes so much deeper than just transcribing music. It is a necessity to be able to take really, really great jaw-dropping solos. And I have an amazing guest with me today to help with that. But before I introduce him, I know that we have a lot of people from all around the world listening into this live stream. So please, in the chat, in the comments, please say hey and tell us where you're from. And with that said, today I have master musician and guitar teacher Tom Hess to talk about this and help us with this. Hey, Tom Hess, how are you doing?
Good, buddy. How you doing, Dylan?
I am doing good, man. So let's get into it. So I know that you have been helping and teaching people for a really long time. You're an incredible musician yourself. What has your ear training journey been like for you? When did you start training your ear? What was that like?
Well, it was it was long, it was slow, it was hard, it was messy, it was kind of a disaster. So when I started playing, I didn't know what ear training was. I didn't even know it existed. I mean, it was just the amount of ignorance that I had in me at the time, and for quite a long while, for I don't know, first 2, 3, 4 years, was pretty big. So I was interested in the guitar playing part, but I didn't really know that you could or that you were supposed to be developing your ear. I really didn't have a clue until I got into a band, the other guitar player at the time in the band, he had a really good ear, and I just assumed he was a freak. There's something wrong with him. I mean, in a good way. There's something wrong. He has some sort of skills that I don't have. He blessed with certain, musical skills. He was good, with his ear and other things. He was quite creative, and especially for that time. Um, and I didn't even then seeing him and playing in a band with him, I really didn't get it that this is something you're supposed to work on. It seemed to come natural to him. It didn't come natural to me. And I thought, well, that's just how it is. And what happened later was I started taking lessons, which even though my first couple of teachers were not really very good, but I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know what was a good teacher or not. So, but even though they weren't that great, it helped me. And one of them told me, so we need to start working on your ear because you're having a hard time hearing, when you're playing in time and things about phrasing and things like that. So that was the first inkling that I learned that this is important and it's something you can learn. It's something you're supposed to learn. Okay. So I started working on it, but it was really hard. I didn't really know what to do. The teacher I had wasn't very skilled at teaching ear training or things like that. But I kind of stumbled through it. It was a very slow process, but over a long, long period of time, I eventually got better at it. And then what really happened for me was I was always been and still am today influenced by really, really great singers. I mean, I love great guitar players and certainly have my favorites, just like we all do. But I'm really drawn to great singing and really great singers. And I'm a frustrated singer. I can't sing. I've never really put any effort into trying to sing. I just don't have the voice for it. But I love great singing. And my goal as a guitar player for the next many years was to try to emulate as many or as much as I can from great singers. And I would listen to records or cassettes. This is, many years ago, and then CDs of some of my favorite singers singing. And I would try to understand how can I try to recreate as much of that as I can. I mean, obviously I was limited as a musician. My hearing was limited. I didn't have a super great ear at that time. My guitar skills were limited. And then there are inherent limitations in the guitar itself. It can't mimic everything that a voice can do. But I didn't know what the limits was. I just knew that I had limits. And I figured, well, there may be limits to what the guitar can do, but I need to remove or at least reduce whatever my limitations are. And that was really the first big motivation that I had to really try to develop my ear and listened super carefully because I wanted my phrasing to improve. And what I was really after was accuracy of expression. So I have things that I want to express when I write music or improvise or play or write a solo or whatever. And it's important to me to gain the skills needed to be as accurate as I can be to express whatever those thoughts or feelings or emotions are. And that the starting point of that is having a really, really great ear. And so that motivated me to get to work on the ear. And then a little bit later, I realized through another friend of mine, Mike Walsh. Some of you listening here know who Mike Walsh is, one of the greatest guitar players and teachers ever. Um, Mike and I played in bands for many years, uh, and he would often use his voice for improvising and writing. Now, he's not, a great singer either, although he's better than me, but he's not a great singer. But he used his voice to improvise and write to try to get ideas from the start. Instead of trying to copy a voice, which was what my approach was, is he's originating from voice and then going out through guitar. So it was a different approach to writing and improvising, which I have since adopted because it's a really great thing. But it sort of demands from us to really develop our ears, and those were sort of my history. Of course, I went to music school and had to take aural skills classes and ear training classes, and that helped. But it was taught in a very linear way, and I don't think that is the best way at all to learn most anything with music, but particularly ear training. So that's the story basically of history with training ear.
Yeah. Yeah, your story is very similar to mine. I think a lot of musicians where we didn't even know ear training was a thing. You were either born with it or you weren't. If you didn't have it, too bad. And then the majority of us aren't good singers too. It seems like most guitar players don't have that skill, which I don't either. And you kind of touched on it a little bit too, but why is aural skills so important to improvisation and taking great solos?
Well, the creative process, there are many ways you can use, or many different tools you can use to be creative. Okay. And not all of those are related to music theory or your ear. There are other things you can do, but you're limited when you can't hear, and particularly when you can't hear in advance what those tools or ideas or musical notes or solos or chords or whatever are going to sound like either before you play them, that's preferable, or at least a split second or as you play them or split second before. Okay. At the minimum, you want to know what the next note is going to sound like before you play it. Now, hopefully you get to the point where you can train yourself to hear further and further and further and further out in time. So when you're improvising, you're not just hearing what the next note is. So if you're on the third string, ninth fret, and you're thinking about playing the third string, 10th fret, hopefully you have a sense of what that note's going to sound like. But ultimately, you want to be able to think beyond that and know beyond that. So you've got the next 8 notes, the next 12 notes, whatever the next phrase is. That's where you want to get to. So you're planning in your mind the sound of what the next phrase or lick is going to be in your solo. And then you go to the guitar and you execute that. And now you're just trying to confirm, is what I played what I thought I heard in my mind, or what I tried to create with my voice or whatever while improvising. And one of the reasons why this is so important is accuracy. For me, as I said earlier, a big goal is mine is accuracy of expression. I've got something I want to express, and whether what I want to express is something that people like or not, I don't really concern myself so much with that. My main concern is I've got something I want to express, and how accurately can I express that emotionally the first time? And in order to do that, you've got to be working on your ear and develop a pretty good ear. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is phrase refinement. When you're practicing, whether you're practicing improvising or even just practicing, guitar technique or whatever, It's crucial, in my opinion, it's crucial to be constantly refining the phrase or phrases that you're playing. And what many people do, and I have many students that, would do this too, and I try to correct them on this, is when improvising, they'll play a phrase, and then after they play it, they move on to the next one. They play another lick, and then they play another one, another phrase, etc. But what they don't do naturally is go back and refine the first one. We always want to come back and refine and refine and refine. And how would you refine that? You use your ear, right? If you just go on to the next one, you're not learning a whole lot in the process. And it feels like, oh, I'm being creative because I go from lick to lick to lick and I've improvised them all. Yeah, you're doing something creative in a sense, but your creativity skills are limited in terms of how fast they're going to improve. So by refining the licks that you play, like going back and let's see if I can squeeze a little bit more emotion out of this. Let's see if I can make this a little bit more accurate. Can I make the sound a little bit cooler? Refining it, refining it, refining it. That makes you a much more creative and better player, in my view. So why are our skills so important in improvisation? Accuracy. And then the second thing is it gives you the tools to refine phrases, which makes everything that you're playing just going to sound better.
Yeah, it's the difference between, for me, okay guitar players and great guitar players. Because most guitar players are reactive. Like were you saying, they only know what the note is going to feel like or sound like until after they play it, which is like not a good thing. Like if you were speaking and you only knew what you said after you said it, that's not going to be good.
Yeah, you can get
But
yourself in a lot of trouble that way.
you get yourself in a lot of trouble, and you get yourself in a lot of trouble when you're taking solos too. It hurts creativity. It makes it really hard. And two, when you don't have a trained ear, usually the only things you're thinking about when you're taking a solo is, well, probably pentatonic pattern 1. I'm going to start in the same place I always start. You're thinking of notes, you're thinking of scale shapes, you're not thinking of emotions, what you want to express, how can I accurately express that. All of these things are what I've found what great guitar players think of as they're soloing. The last thing we think of is what scales we're using, what notes we're using. It's always what do we want to express first, And but a lot of guitar players really lack in that area. Why do you think so many guitar players struggle with ear training or don't have a good ear?
Well, super great question. I think that the reason why so many players are lacking when it comes to ear training is that they believe or assume that ear training is hard. It takes a long, long time to develop, and practicing it or learning it is boring. I really think it comes down to those three things. Hard, takes a long time, and it's boring. Now, in my case, when I started out, as I mentioned some moments ago, there was a fourth thing, which I was completely ignorant to it. So I wasn't even thinking far enough to think, oh, this is hard. It's going to take a long time and it's boring. I didn't even get that far. I just thought, actually, I didn't think anything. No thoughts went into my brain. It's just like, well, I can't hear things like my friend Jim can. So that's just how it is. I mean, that's complete ignorance that I had. But after that, you kind of think, wow, this is kind of boring. It kind of takes a long time and it's hard. When I was in university, I aced every music class I ever took. I mean, aced them easily because I worked hard, not because I was smart. Okay. But the aural skills classes, the ear training classes, every single semester, the highest grade I got was a B. Got a B every time. I never got an A in that class. Today it would be different, but at that time, I couldn't crank out the A. Couldn't do it. See my report card at the end of the semester, A. Oh, aural skills, B. Damn. So I was not very happy about that. But point is that if you think it's going to be hard or take a long time or it's going to be boring, how motivated are most people going to be to learn it, to practice it, to get a teacher or a coach to help you, to do the training, to do whatever? It's just, we just kind of accept that, well, this is going to take a long time and it's going to be hard and it's going to be boring. Maybe I'll learn it, maybe I won't. But it's that attitude just massively limits so many other aspects of our playing. It limits our ability to understand and internalize music theory, makes music theory much harder, makes music understanding it and applying it much harder, and makes songwriting harder. It makes improvising harder. It makes developing phrasing harder. Even physical technique, which you might think shouldn't have a lot to do with your ear, it does. You have to analyze all that in real time. That's part of ear training. It's not the kind of ear training you're going to learn in university, but it's an aspect of your ear and your hearing and developing your hearing. So I think that a lot of people just think hard takes a long time and it's boring. And maybe they've read a book or maybe they took a college class or whatever on aural skills or ear training. Maybe they've tried, some apps or whatever online, whatever. That stuff doesn't work that well without an enormous amount of time and effort and work and just a long time. So that's why I think that for a lot of people, including myself at one point, struggle with this. I think there is a second component also, which is if a guitar player's objective when improvising or soloing is simply to play the notes of the solo, play the tablature, or cram in as many licks as on the guitar, or if that's what you're thinking about instead of thinking about emotions and things you want to express, then the next thought that comes to your mind might not be, hey, I need to train my ear. But if you're thinking about, I know I've got certain things I want to express, deep things I want to express accurately, if that's your goal, then it becomes pretty obvious that developing your ear is an absolutely crucial, probably the most important part of being able to even try to do that.
Yeah, and it too, like you're saying, most people think that it's slow, it's boring, it's hard, and I don't blame them either, because it seems that the majority of, like, if you try to research how to train your ear or anything, it's almost everything is taught in a really slow and boring way. I went to music school too. They taught it in a very linear way, and I was the same. I aced every class because of how hard I worked. And you did better than me. Ear training, I did much worse than a B. It just it wouldn't work out for me, But yeah, it's everything is in a very seriously linear step-by-step way that is really slow and boring. And I've downloaded every one of those apps. They're all. Have you ever tried any of the ear training apps before?
Well, no, not for myself, but sometimes students would ask me, hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of that app? Well, I don't know. Let me go see. And then I would, take a look at it and, give them my thoughts on it. But at the time when I was, in university, the internet was this was in the 90s. So
Yeah.
the internet was just starting. There weren't any ear training apps that I was aware of at that time. We did have a software program in the computer lab in the university, and I used that. But it was long and it was tedious, and it was boring. But the apps, there are many problems with apps that exist. I mean, one of the many problems is that the way that you're supposed to use the app isn't consistent with how music works in real life. That's the biggest problem from my perspective. Not that the apps don't have any value, but it's just going to be a long, tedious process, because that's not how, when you're improvising, there's no app. Okay. It's just not the best way to learn that stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, and I think if musicians are trying to train their ear and they think it is slow and boring and tough, I always view that as a symptom that you're doing it wrong or you're training your ear in the wrong way. Because ear training is a very simple, and if you start on the right way, easy and fun process. What are some common ear training mistakes that you see guitar players make when they're training their ears?
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you asked. And this actually ties perfectly to my opinion about why I think ear training apps, for the most part, are not so good. What I think that one of the biggest mistakes, I got four things that come to my mind immediately, but one of them is that most, in my opinion, just after teaching, many, 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 many people over the years, when we first talk about ear training, most people don't understand what they're supposed to be learning or what they're supposed to be trying to improve. They're they're barking up the wrong tree. Okay. They're on the wrong path, in my opinion. So what they're trying to do, and what these apps and stuff sometimes try to help them to do, is to identify certain sounds or intervals. Okay. But music, listen, we use sound, but music really isn't sound. It's a piece of it. It's part of the fabric. Okay. But really, music is about emotion. It's about expression of some kind of emotion or feel. Okay. And not every feel is an emotion, but every emotion is a feeling, right? So if I pull on your arm, that's not an emotion. I mean, you could have an emotional response to it, like be mad or something or annoyed, but this is a feeling, but it's not an emotion. Okay. So when people are listening to try to identify sounds, okay, let's imagine that we got a magic wand. Here's my letter opener. Got a magic wand. It's a magic wand now. Sprinkle some fairy dust. And now all of a sudden you can identify sounds. What are you going to do with that information? Nothing. You're not going to do anything with it. Maybe you might be able to impress your friends. Oh, I think that's a C note. Oh, yep, it's C. Okay, you got it right. Ding, ding, ding. You're the winner. And now what are you going to do with that information? Nothing. I mean, what can you do with it? Now you can't do anything with it. Okay. You can get the answer right on an app. That's what you can do. What we want to do is understand what it is we're supposed to be trying to learn and master. And that is the emotion of music. So when you hear a chord play within a song or a chord progression, or you hear a couple of notes played over that chord, you want to understand what is the emotion that you are hearing. First, you've got to identify what that is. Then we're going to attach to that feeling its name. And the name is never going to be C chord or B flat note. That doesn't tell you anything about the emotion. But telling you that the sixth, if you hear a sound and you're like, oh, that feels like this. Well, knowing that that's the sixth chord of a minor key, that tells you a lot now. You've identified the emotion, and you've identified the label for that emotion musically, in music theory terms. So now you have both of those pieces. Okay. When I took aural skills classes in university, we would learn, to try to identify intervals and so on. Okay, fine. I can identify, a perfect fifth or a major seventh or whatever by sound. How useful is that directly? It's not useful yet until you do the translation to take that symbol and attach emotional meaning to it. The problem with that is that a major seventh has no emotional meaning outside of its isolated context. I mean, it's going to have some, but it's going to change depending upon where that major seventh interval appears in the context of the music. So if it's the root and the major seventh of the key and the one chord is being played, that tells you something, yeah, for sure. But as soon as we change the chord, that same major seventh interval or any major seventh interval does not feel the same way anymore, because the function of both of those notes against the context of the key and the context of the given chord being played in that moment changes the relationship between those notes and those chords or those harmonies. And therefore, the emotion, how we feel when we hear it, also changes. So if you can identify by ear a major seventh interval, good for you. Now, tell me what it's going to feel like before it's played. If we can't do that, we got nothing, right? We can pass a test, but we can't use much directly. Okay. We want to know, or I think you want to know, what is the emotion going to be before I play it, before I create it, before I improvise it? If you know that, you have mastered music. Doesn't mean you've mastered everything about guitar playing, but you've mastered what the essence of music is. Okay. So I think that most people are trying to identify intervals or sounds. Now, there's a place for that. I'm not saying it's wrong or bad. I'm just saying it's massively incomplete. You're going to be chasing emotions, not sounds, not arbitrary intervals. Okay. That's my first take on this. The second thing is it's trying to learn things that don't matter as much as other things. Sorry, did you want to comment, Dylan, before I go on?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that one of the main things you're saying there is that listening to anything in isolation is pointless. Is that right?
Mm, it's usually pointless. There can be a case where it's not pointless, and here's the case. If let's say we'll take the major seventh example. You're playing, let's say we're in the key of C, and you've got C, and then you go up to a B note, so you got a major seventh interval. The general feeling of the B against the C is useful if and when we're in that key and the one chord is being played, the C major chord.
Right.
In that case, the isolated context of the major seventh with C and B will be the same or very, very similar to that same interval played over a one chord in that key.
Yes.
So in that case, it's like a broken clock. It's right a couple times a day. But as soon as it's not, 5 p.m. and the clock doesn't say 5 p.m. anymore, it's not right anymore. So when we go from the one chord to the five chord, the C and B, that major seventh interval doesn't feel anything like it did before. So the context changes. And in all of those situations, which is the majority of what music is and what we hear and play, the isolated context doesn't transfer over very well without a lot of translation in our heads. We don't want to make that translation. It's like when you're speaking English, you're trying to learn German, let's say, another language, and you don't know it enough to think in German. You now have to have your thought in English, say it to yourself in English, find the German words, say it in German. Then someone responds in German. You have to then hear all that back in German. You have to, translate all that back to English in your head because you're still thinking in English. And then from there, you can make a decision about what this person just said and what I'm going to say next in response or whatever. If you get to the point where you're thinking natively in the German language or whatever, then all of that time and effort is eliminated. That's where I'm trying to go here with this.
Great. Keep going. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Yeah. So the second thing I was saying was, trying to learn things that don't matter as much as other things. So fortunately, when I learned in college aural skills, we did not use the solfege system. There's a system for ear training aural skills called solfege. The do, re, mi, fa, sol, all that stuff. That's solfege. Okay. And then there's fixed do and movable do. And if you guys know what solfege is, then you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what it is, trust me, you're not missing anything. Okay. If it's not in your life now, you'll be just fine without it. Believe me. Okay. So what we did is, and what I think that what my professors really did well at in teaching aural skills was teaching function. So this was way better because now we're using the function of the numbers within the scale or within a chord or arpeggio to identify intervals. That was light years better in my view because it doesn't require a translation process from solfege to note function or chord function and then back to solfege. All that's eliminated. So I think that was a better thing. But still, if you're learning intervals, or let's say an arpeggio, you're singing an arpeggio in aural skills class, that has value, but it's not the most valuable thing because all those things are isolated. And as soon as the context changes, it all goes out the window. Now you've either got to learn it new in the new context or translate everything in your mind. When you're sitting back at your desk or your chair, or you're in your car and or wherever you're thinking about stuff, you have time to translate. But when you're improvising, you don't have that kind of time. There's no time. I mean, the music's going by. You have no time for this. Okay. And even if you did have time, it's really hard. So why don't we skip that step and focus on that which is emotional based on the context that we are currently in. And then when the chord changes, the harmony changes, the key changes, now we're doing it based on that context. We did a system that works with that. And chord function, note function is a much better system in my view. The next Go ahead, Dylan.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I completely agree. And I had another question for you about identifying emotions and going through those chords. But do you want to go through that third point first?
Sure. Yeah. So the third point, the third and fourth, I think I said four. Yeah, I said two. Okay. So the third point is some people try to strive for perfect pitch. I think most people don't, but I have had students that they do this. They're trying to identify just by hearing what, C sharp sounds like. Well, it's not worth all of the effort, even if you could develop that skill at this point in your life, if you're not a kid anymore, like a baby, it's not worth that effort because knowing what C sharp sounds like doesn't tell you what the emotion will be when you put that note in different contexts, such as over a C sharp minor chord or such as over an A major chord or whatever. So identifying emotions and where they are on the guitar, that's the holy grail. That's what we're after. So that's the third thing. A lot of people, they're striving for pitches, not emotions.
That the perfect pitch thing was completely new to me a while ago because I always thought that ear training was perfect pitch. That, and I think a lot of people have this misconception is that they think if you have a really trained ear, you know when an A chord is happening, you know when a C sharp minor chord is happening, and it's not at all. I've met a few people with perfect pitch that had it, and it comes down to that exact same thing you said. Really, it's not worth the effort. You need to train your ear on the emotions, on identifying those emotions, and knowing if it's a C note isn't nearly as valuable as if you know it's expressing exactly this. So I think that that's a really big distinction is perfect pitch usually isn't worth the effort to go into it.
Yeah, it's an enormous amount of effort. And even if you acquired it, you still have to make all this translation back into emotion because C sharp now has to mean something. See, C sharp doesn't mean anything until we know what its function is. And the emotion is derived primarily from, or the basis, I should say, of the emotion is based on its relationship to whatever the underlying harmony is. If there is a harmony, if it's not, there's not a harmony, then it's in relation to the pitches that are going horizontally this way through time. So it's placement within a melody and the hierarchy of the scale, etc.
Yeah.
So you still, C sharp doesn't tell you much. It tells you where the note is on the guitar, but doesn't tell you what it's going to feel like until we understand its function, which is the baseline for the emotion. And then the last thing I was going to say about your question is, which we already talked about anyway, is this linear process that when you go through, when you approach training your ear in the same way you would approach learning mathematics, you learn to identify what the numbers are when you're very, very, very small, right? Then you learn how to count. Then you learn how to add. Then you learn how to subtract. Then you learn how to multiply, then divide. And it just goes up from there. Okay. So you generally, you don't start with calculus, right? You don't do a little calculus today, little geometry tomorrow, a little algebra the next day. That's not how we teach and learn math. But in musical skills, even the technical aspect of musical skills or guitar skills is not best taught or learned in a linear process, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that goes to learning really anything on the guitar. I mean, especially ear training, but learning in a linear way doesn't, I mean, if we were robots, it would work one step after another, but it's so slow and boring because if you get caught on one thing and you can't move on until you've mastered that one thing, the majority of people are going to want to give up because it's taking so long, it's so boring. And this is something that I tell students that I teach all the time is the goal of the lesson you're getting or whatever you're working on isn't to master it. It's just to get a little bit better. You're always trying to just improve a little bit here, a little bit there in this area. And like you said, just growing them all up together is way better than one step at a time.
Yeah.
And with all of the emotions that you're talking about, identifying emotions in music, what are some ways that people can go about figuring out the emotions that are being expressed or that they want to express?
Well, those are sort of two different things. In
Yeah.
terms of, let me take the second one first. the starting point to expressing emotion is having something to say, right? If you don't have anything to say, what are we doing? I mean, we have nothing really to work with. We're just trying to arbitrarily find different emotions that we're not connected to in that moment. So it's, I know a person who happens to be, who's trying to be a writer. Okay. Not a musician, but words, books, stuff like that. Trying to be a writer. And he's pretty good at writing, knows all the grammar rules. Okay. He's got a pretty dense vocabulary, speaks two languages fluently at least. Okay. Knows certainly a lot more about writing than I do. I mean, by a million miles, a lot more. Okay. I'm certainly not a very good writer myself. But the difference is I have a lot to say. Not about everything, but if I have something meaningful to me I want to express, I've got a lot to say about it. This particular person, I'm not so sure he has a lot to say. I'm not saying and that's not a personal attack on him at all. It's not a criticism of him. It's just my observation. I could be wrong. It's possible. But my observation is he's a good technical writer, got the vocabulary, understands the grammar, okay, all of that stuff. But the content, the raw content of what is trying to be expressed is not very dense, in my opinion. Okay. And maybe other people would disagree, and that's fine. But I think the starting point is having something to say, something that is it's urgent for you almost to get it out, to say this, to express this. I think that's really the most important thing. That's the starting point. And that's, of course, totally separate from writing songs or improvising or training your ear or any of the tools required to do the expressing. You got to sometimes dig down deep to find something worthy to you, not worthy to me or somebody else, but what you find to be worthy to really say. First, you're going to be way more motivated to find the tools, to acquire the skills, to express something that you feel absolutely compelled to express. If you don't have that compulsion, how motivated are you going to be to do the practicing, do the training, pay for the class, the lesson, the course? I mean, how go to an event? How motivated are you going to be to do all that? Probably not so motivated. So I think that's the first part. Dylan, I'm going to need you to ask me again your question, because I said I answered the second part, but I forgot what the first part was.
Yeah, so also, what are some ways that people can go about figuring out how to express specific emotions? Like if they think of, okay, this is exactly what I want to say, but they have no idea how to get it out, what are some ways that they can go about expressing that
Okay.
in solos?
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to give you a real simple process to do this. I teach this at my Songwriting Mastery Lab event. I also teach this in other events and things I do with my students as well. But basically, a good starting point, if you're not sure I got these things I want to say, have no idea where they are on the guitar, how to express them, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, cool, no problem. There are 7 elements of music. 7. They're not 6, not 8, there are 7. Okay. And what you want to do is first identify what they are. If you don't know, I will tell you. They're melody, in no particular order here. They're melody, harmony, rhythm, dynamics, texture, timbre, and form. Melody, harmony, rhythm, texture, timbre, dynamics, and form. I think I said 7. Okay. So now you may or may not know a lot about all or some of these, but now you know what they are. This is the starting point. So you get yourself a whiteboard or a piece of paper. You can do this in Excel or a spreadsheet. Okay. And you do this. You make 7. Actually, you'll need 8 columns, really. What do we got? 3, 6, 7, 8. Drawing sloppy here, but there you go. There's my 8 kindergarten columns. Okay. So over here, you're going to have leave the first column blank. Then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Each one of these is for one of the 7 elements of music. Okay. So in any order, the order doesn't matter. So that might be rhythm, that might be melody, that might be harmony, texture, timbre, form, etc. Dynamics, whatever. Okay. So now you've got this. And over here in this column, we'll call it column 0. This is where you write just a little note to yourself, one sentence or less. What precisely emotionally are you trying to express in this moment or in this part of the song, the solo, or whatever? Okay. From there, you write down your little sentence, and now you ask yourself, if this was rhythm, you might say, what is everything I know about rhythm that if I used only rhythm and no pitches, no melody, no harmony, no nothing, just rhythm, what could I possibly do? What exists that I know of, that I'm aware of, that I've learned so far that could help express at least a little bit whatever this thought or feeling is? You want to write that down for yourself. Okay. Now, when it comes time to actually write the music, it doesn't mean that you must use these rhythmic ideas. You don't have to do anything, but at least you have a starting point where, okay, this is the emotion. These are some ideas that I am aware of that I could use rhythmically to express this. Now, if you're saying, well, wait a minute, how do you get those ideas? What are you talking about? Well, there's a fast way and a slow way. Okay, I learned it the slow way, and then I created a fast way, but I'm not here to sell anything. Okay, I have events that describe this, but those events aren't happening this year anyway, so there's nothing to buy. There's nothing for me to sell you. Okay, when the time comes, I'll be selling, but that ain't this year, and it won't be next year either. Anyway, the point is that you can learn these things, but if you didn't know, if you just simply listen to music that has or that expresses the same kind of emotion that you want to express, and you make a file for yourself with all the little examples. So take any emotion you want, be specific. Don't just say happy. That's too broad. Okay. But let's say something more like the emotion of the people that you experience of triumph or pride or hope, let's say. Pick anything. Think about every song you've ever heard, every piece of classical music. There's a gold mine in classical music. Not the whole song, but just particular moments, maybe just the introduction or the second half of a chorus of a song or whatever, the B section of a sonata, whatever it is. You make a little list. I have such a list for myself. I have a big, enormous Excel file where I can go for reference. So if I wanted to express triumph, let's say, I might have a list of 50, 60 different parts of songs or classical pieces, 19th century romantic era music, whatever, that have some of that in there. Now I have a bunch of examples, and not that I'm going to go and steal those things note for note, but I have a place to go to look for patterns. So rhythmically, what are happening in these pieces that tend to express this emotion? Well, now I can identify them and write them down. And then I never have to go back to that list again to get them because now I got them and I internalized them. You only have to do this really once, maybe twice. You do the same thing with the next element, melody, harmony, whatever it is. Okay. It takes time to do this, but it is a gold mine for you as a writer, as an improviser, as a teacher. Absolute freaking gold. Okay. And you'll have it till you're, 100 years old in your rocking chair thinking about all this. It's really, really cool. Okay. So that's the long way. The short way is for someone to just teach it to you. But that's the long way. That's how I learned it originally. Okay. Taking music theory concepts, translating it to things like this, and making note of it. So even if your skills are not advanced yet, if you don't think of yourself as an advanced guitar player, if you don't have a lot of guitar technique under your hands yet, if you don't know a lot about music theory yet, if you don't have a very good ear yet, if you're still lacking in certain areas, that's okay, because you have a basis now that you could use for songwriting, improvising, teaching, for anything. There's something there you can go to. And when you put those together, it's going to create a fairly reliable starting point for you to write or improvise with. It doesn't mean you have to follow those things. You don't. You could just use them as a starting point to spark ideas. Maybe you'll use some of the ideas, maybe you'll not use any of them, but now you have a place to begin. Does that answer the question there for you, Dylan?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. That is as far as taking great solos, that is some of the best advice, is to build a huge bank of things that express this, express that, going through the 7 elements. And like you said, it is a lot of front end work, but once you have it, it is an incredible resource. I use it. It's an amazing thing to have.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing to that?
Yeah.
A little bit of personal history. My favorite guitar player for many years, and still to this very day, is Andy LaRocque. He's the guitar player for King Diamond. By far my favorite guitar player. And I used to, in the 90s, I made a recording, a cassette recording of every Andy LaRocque guitar solo for the first, at that time would have been first 5 or 6 albums. Every single, and it was just the solos. And in my car, I had a cassette player, and I would listen to just his solos again and again and again and again and again. Driving to work, I used to work at the airport, United Airlines at the time, hour and 20-minute ride. It was bad, it sucked. But I made that car ride awesome. Okay. And I'd be so inspired by what I heard. So that was the kind of the that wasn't this yet. It didn't turn into this, but it was just a starting point for inspiration. And then later on, I realized, okay, I got these cool things I can listen to. It's completely inspiring to me. And but I don't really understand what's going on in all those. What there's different emotions happening in different solos from different tunes. What are the similarities in what's occurring in the music that makes similar emotional, expressive things happen in the solo? That was the starting. I went through a more primitive version of this, trying to categorize the solos and the phrases and the licks in the solos to okay, well, I've got, for this emotion, I've got these examples. For this emotion, I got these. And I did the same thing with my favorite singers. And I would chop up songs, just maybe a phrase or half of a sentence or something, half of a line of lyrics. It's not the words itself. I don't really care what they say. I only care how they sang it. Okay. And I would do the same thing for certain emotions. And I would make these little cassettes, and it might be 10 minutes long, of phrases that expressed a certain emotion. Then I would go to the guitar, and I would try to emulate as many of that as I could on the guitar, based on, with the skills that I had, which were certainly more limited then than they are today. But I would try and emulate that and understand more than just simply try to copy something note for note, or even copy the phrasing. I wanted to understand, what exactly am I trying to copy or capture? What are the unifying themes here about rhythm, about dynamics, about the timbre, about the harmony, about all of these 7 elements of music, which I learned in university, like I think the first or second day of music theory class, I learned this. And I immediately thought, oh, I just got all my money's worth on this one class. I got all my money's worth, because someone had I didn't know this stuff. I didn't know there were 7 elements of music, and I certainly didn't know what they were. I didn't know anything. And I thought, I can use this. And I've been using it every day since.
Yeah, and the one thing you're talking about too that's great is when you hear a great solo or a great phrase or anything, not just thinking to yourself, "Oh, this sounds great, I'm going to steal it," but trying to figure out, why do I think it's great? How can I replicate what I think is great and make it my own? That is an exercise that will improve anybody's solos. I mean, just figuring out why you like something will just bring you to a completely different level. And one more question for you, Tom Hess, is with expressing solos and trying to think of what you want to say and express them, does it matter what chords are happening while you're soloing? And if so, why does that matter when you're trying to express different emotions?
Yeah, it's you can think about chords like different places that you go. Okay. So right now I'm sitting here in my office. So when I'm in my office, I I'm in a certain role. Okay. When I'm around my kids, I'm in a different role. Same person, different role. When I go to the gym, it's a different role. When I go to the store, different role. Go to the bank, different role. When I get on an airplane, it's a different role. When I'm a student at a seminar somewhere, I'm in a different role. When I'm on stage being the speaker, it's a different role. So I'm the same person, just like we're all the same person. You can think of each of those different roles as a chord. Every chord has a certain role in the context of the key and of the music, but also when you're in different roles, don't you behave different? When I'm on an airplane, I behave very different, okay, believe me, than I do, I don't know, at a restaurant. Same person, different behavior. I don't want to go to jail on an airplane. Okay. So I watch things that I say. In a restaurant, I might not watch what I say as much. Okay. Certainly I wouldn't here in the office, but you get the idea. So you're in a different context. So when you, as the player, are playing over different chords, anything you play over that chord is going to be colored because not the flavor, the emotion of the chord is pushing everything in that emotional direction. And then when the chord changes, it's being pushed in a different emotional direction. So the key as a whole and the background has a very general, broad set of emotional possibilities. And then each chord starts to define where we are emotionally in that moment while that chord is played. So if you are aware of that and you are thinking, okay, the 6 chord feels like this, but the 5 chord feels like that, that might, and in my opinion, should influence how you might play over it. So for those of you who like or have ever heard Yngwie Malmsteen play, listen to how Yngwie plays over a 4 chord or a 6 chord and compare that to how he plays over the 5 chord. You can take 100 different Yngwie solos, identify, here's a 4 chord. How does Yngwie play over the 4 chord in this song, in this song, in this song, in this solo, in this solo, in this? You'll see patterns. And then you put on, I don't know, I Am a Viking from his second album, and there's a 5 chord, and you hear how he plays on the 5 chord. It's very different than how he played over the 4. Okay. And then you go to the next song, and then you go to Far Beyond the Sun. And when that 5 chord comes, how does he play there? He is very well aware, as most great players are, what the emotion of the chords inherently are. And then he matches not only what notes he plays, but how he phrases them, how aggressive he is when playing, how the articulation is going to be, how the phrasing is going to be, how dense the rhythm is going to be, the dynamic level, the texture, all of it is usually matched to the emotion of the chord. And what Yngwie does so well, as many great players do, is they are aware of what the inherent emotion of the chord is, and then they exaggerate it, they extract it. Think about it this way. Imagine watching a movie, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, with no music. Hard to imagine Star Wars without music, right? Darth Vader comes, no music, no Darth Vader theme. A little less scary now, right? A little less ominous, right? But as soon as you hear the tune, Darth Vader doesn't even have to be on screen yet. Doesn't matter. You hear it and you feel it right away. Okay. Lord of the Rings, same thing. You hear that ring theme or the little Hobbit thing or whatever, or the theme, the music for the elves, you feel it. The scene, the emotion of the scene of the story already exists. And now the composer's job is to take that and blow it up, exaggerate it. That's how Ingve, for example, plays over chords. Now, whether you like Ingve or not, it's not really the point. The point is he is exceptional at this skill. When people talk about Ingve, they talk about, how great he is and, his great technique and a pioneer and he gets a lot of credit for things that he certainly earned that credit for. But he also, at the same time, Ingve is really an underrated player, as many great players are. They're really underrated because they don't often get credit for the other things that make them. We could say the same thing about someone like Stevie Ray Vaughan. Great player in his own right. I wouldn't compare him to Malmsteen in any way. But there are things about Gary Moore or Stevie Ray Vaughan that are great that almost never get talked about because they're not on the surface for most people to see. So I kind of ranted here, got us off track, but I'm really excited about this topic. I'm glad we're having this conversation today, Dylan, because this is right up my alley. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and thinking about the chords as different places is really, really smart. And you're going to treat each place in a different way. And I think it goes back to is being a really good solo player is training your ear to be able to identify chords. That is one of the foundational things. And then going deeper, how do you play within those, is an awesome thing, Thank you, Tom Hess. The tips that we talked about today, I mean, I've learned stuff myself. I'm sure everyone watching has learned a lot of stuff. And to help you guys with training your ear more, I have something for you as well with some tips that you can do to help you train your ear to identify chords, to be able to take better solos. And it's this free video that I have that goes through 5 easy ways to practice ear training. This is completely free. You don't have to do anything. There is a link in the description on YouTube and Facebook. I've also put a link in the chat that you guys can follow and download. Again, it's completely free. There's no obligation with it, and it just goes through the easiest ways that you can start training your ear that you can use absolutely every single day. So, Tom Hess, thank you so much again for being here and answering all these questions and helping us with it. And for everyone else watching, thank you guys for coming, and I will see you guys at the next live stream that we do. Have a good one.